So this panel is on everything to do with AI. So what I'd like to do is have each one of the speakers, do a short intro of themselves. I think Krishna is the only one who actually took our suggestion and put up some slides, right? And that may be because he's actually a professor in real life also. So why don't we just walk down and Guido, you can start.
Fantastic. So I'm a recovering CTO. Normally, if you tell a recovering CTO there's an opportunity to present slides, I jump on that immediately. I didn't know that, but all good. Guido, I'm an investment partner at Andreessen Horowitz. We're a US-based venture capital fund. Before moving over to the dark side, I was CTO of Intel's data center division, CTO at VMware, and before that started two companies, one sold to HP and one to Arista.
Hi everyone, Jenny Lee, Senior Managing Partner in GraniteAsia. We're on the bright side. So I've been on the bright side for the last 25 years, working with entrepreneurs globally. As a fund, we manage about 10 billion multi-stage, from early stage seed all the way to growth venture. We've been very fortunate to be able to invest in the US and China market, two of our largest market. Obviously, Southeast Asia is fast and growing as well. Across the board, we have about 600 portfolio companies, created over 120 unicorns, and also brought over 60 plus companies public. And so very happy to be here. I think one of our mission is continue the work that we have done. Hopefully we can find more up and coming emerging companies in Asia, particularly those anchored in Singapore, and hopefully many of this incubated and created by the NUS system.
Krishna.
Thanks, Sian Wee. Thanks NUS and Sian Wee for hosting us. I'm probably the outlier in the group in more ways than one, beyond making my own slides. Is that for the longest time I was an academic. Started out my career at a place called the Plant Institute of Mathematical Sciences in the applied math area, then migrated through various places, was actually never fired, had tenure in multiple locations, Caltech, my last stop was Rice University, and in 2022, what can be best described as a fit of insanity, I retired from Rice University, I gave up tenure, and started this startup company in the quantum computing space. It's called Accelequant, it's a US company. Currently, the largest footprint is in Bangalore, India. And if things go well, soon we'll have a footprint also in Singapore. And in a nutshell, that's who I am.
So this is where I say, please, Ing Chai, could we make him a professor again so we can invest in him? So, okay, just in time, right? Sidu, please, why don't you talk a little bit about yourself?
My apologies, folks, for running late. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Sidu. I've been in the industry for a couple of decades now. Before this, I did a whole string of startups from 2005 onwards. In 2015, my startup was acquired by the Gojek Group. And then I was in the Gojek Group for the next 7 odd years until 22. And then I quit to start RealFast, which is focusing on applied AI in IT services.
All right, hi everyone, my name is Thuc, and I guess my venture into AI started in 2004 when I started doing research at Carnegie Mellon. So the landscape of AI has changed, so much since then. So it's very interesting to see how things, got transformed. Started a few companies after my PhD at Stanford. My first one was in social analytics space, acquired by Google. Last one was in robotics for healthcare, and that one also got acquired. And so very glad to be here today.
So the session today, right, what we're basically going to be doing is to explore how universities and industry can create AI spinouts that succeed globally, right, not just locally. So surrounding this, there are 3 realities, right? The first one is AI is advancing quickly. So there's a lot of talks about agents nowadays, but I think, Guido, I, and Thuc, we all know that, agents have been around for a long time. Open models are making also global entry into AI a lot easier. The second item is that compute and cost efficiency are going to become strategic choices now, right? If you want to do an AI startup, and not just technical ones. And the third backdrop is that there are going to come regulations eventually. The European Union has already started with the AI Act, which are going to basically shape, right, which spin-outs can expand globally, which is why, the focus on AI in Europe right now is a lot on B2B. So with that, right, I'd like to touch a little bit, and I'd like to keep this session a little bit free flow. I'll moderate, in terms of, airtime for people. And the first topic is going to be on agentic AI, right? And so right now, today, AI agents, right, are moving from prototypes to enterprise workflows right now. So the first question, and whoever wants to take this up can do it, what makes an AI agent robust enough for real-world use?
Can I make a meta comment first? So currently at Andreessen Horowitz, there's this joke that if you're in a discussion, you don't like the discussion, you just want to stall the discussion, what you have to do is ask, can we first define agent? That's it. That will take the rest of the time because nobody really knows what this thing means. That said, I think we are seeing sort of this idea of an agentic loop, right? This loop of an LLM planning actions, executing actions, using tools, and determining by itself the abort criteria or the completion criteria for the action. Evolve as, maybe this is a little bit early to call it, but in my book, likely the main UI principle for any user-facing application in the future. And in some areas it's working, right? I mean, I don't know any coding agent anymore that's not agentic in the main loop. So I think we're here.
Sidu, you want to comment on that since you're deep in the trenches?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to plus one on that in the sense that I think most conversations about agents are vaporware, like they don't actually exist and it seems hype cycle stuff. I think I changed my mind in May. That we've crossed that because that's when Claude Code plus Sonnet 4 dropped. And that particular combo is the first time that I saw something that's genuinely agentic. And I'm using a very subjective definition, right? Like I don't think there's a good objective definition. But for me, it was, can I delegate work and go away? And then come back and have at least a 50% probability that the work is done up to a certain standard. For us, often the internal metric now is how many minutes is the agent going to run? Producing a valid output. This has become our internal benchmark. And I think that except for Claude Code and to a lesser extent, a couple of other examples like Cursor or other of the development, the agentic IDEs, I don't think I have actually seen anything I would call agentic out there yet. Ironically, as a consequence, we have ended up moving everything internally onto a coding stack weirdly for everything. So our contract review now happens on a Claude Code stack. Our RFC filling for contracts happens on that. We recently had last week, we had a compliance request come in from a customer who's a formally listed US fintech. So insane compliance. The estimate on that was if we had to finish all 400 questions and do justice to diagrams and everything, it was a 5-week estimate. We turned it around in 8 days. So very ironically, we've ported the coding stacks for requirements gathering, legal review, all of this stuff, and it works amazingly. But it's still early days. I think we're like 4 months in at this point. That's my perspective.
Good. Yeah, well, I think the way we would define this is solutioning, right? And we are looking at vertical AI and vertical industries, and that the solutioning is end-to-end. Now, if we have to put a tech word to it, I'll call it adaptive RPA on AI. I think for the control systems guys, you know where I'm coming from, right? So the control systems is working, the loop is happening, it's closing loop, but it's adapting as we go. So is it here? I actually think yes. So we are definitely seeing, from a vertical AI perspective, a lot of different solutions, whether it's vertical solutions for healthcare, vertical solutions for robotics. I think particularly in the areas of physical AI, that loop is closing extremely fast. And hopefully over the next, particularly in Asia, we are seeing it really agentic AI plus the machines. And the machines are not just doing automated tasks, but now increasingly adaptive tasks, taking inputs from the environment.
So Thuc, right? You are now part of the NVIDIA. Is it fair to say empire? So how would you talk about your journey, especially concentrating on things like reliability and cost effectiveness, because you're seeing a lot of those efforts right now.
Yeah, it's a great question. I just want to add a little bit onto the agent, right? We talked about multi-agent system before, Sian. I don't know if you remember. I was doing a PhD thesis on multi-agent system. And I feel like, we are still like at the early stage of a true agentic AI because, there's so much more, right? Right now it's like a single agent, but if you think that, the AI agent can teach each other, can, learn from each other, can critique the kind of adversarial mode, I think the boundary is going to start getting pushed a lot further. And so that's very exciting. But one area is interesting is the safety, the guardrails. I don't think we're quite there yet, right? Especially in critical use cases like healthcare. Then we need to make sure that the AI agent are not going out of the way to do something that has a very, very bad negative consequences. And so that's my thoughts there. In terms of like reliability and efficiency, there are, I guess, the efforts are happening on both sides, the hardware and the software. Hardware, of course, rolling out new chips, better at very specific inferencing tasks. Than just like a more general GPU architecture. But on the software side, there are a lot of techniques that people can apply, digitalization, quantization, to really reducing the model side, reducing the latency, increasing the throughput. And so again, it really depends on your application. You can really pick and choose and find the right approach to optimize for your unit economics, if I may.
Yeah, I think, Krishna, right? You're devoting quite a lot of your time in your quantum computing startup, right? Also on training LLMs right now. So what I've noticed is that open weight models are starting to catch up to proprietary models right now. And so, mathematically also, how can teams, right, build defensibility if others can access the same models, right? What's your opinion on that? And I'll open it to the floor afterwards also.
Thanks. Yeah, you're right. We've been looking very closely at what people call, I guess the buzz phrase is hyperscaling, but what it really means is training much faster and with simultaneously more parameters. And the promise of quantum computing always has been that you could solve larger problems faster. The name of the company, Accelequant, the thesis is that we promise to do this sooner in the marketplace than what you would without us. So we're in stealth mode, so I won't say a lot more. But in about a month or two, we expect to actually respond to your question, where we show that whether you are open or closed to model, you can benefit from a training cycle where your models are much less stale, much more current. So imagine training a large model in 48 hours as opposed to 6 weeks or 5 weeks. And also imagine training 10x initially and maybe 100-fold more parameters at the same time. All this folds into the way quantum computers work. And that's where I would like to stop simply because we are not out of step.
Would you like to say who invested in you?
Yeah, so the round, it's called Seed, but it's a largish seed, led by a VC from Palo Alto called Accel.
Accel invested in Facebook. So, and a whole host of other companies that we knew in the past. Anybody else? Jenny? Guido?
Yeah, well, I would say that the cost of compute has declined substantially. So over the last 18 months, it's actually gone down over 200 times, right? From $10, $15 per million tokens compute to now 5 cents. So I think maybe from an investor perspective, do we care if startups are using open weight or the hyperscalers API? Frankly, it really depends on what the company is trying to achieve. So if the company specifically has proprietary data, needs to compute locally, privacy is a big consideration. And what they're trying to do is very specific, right, in that vertical application. Plus, they must have talent, right, team that can really do leverage open weight and customize it. You know, it goes back to, and I'm old, the Linux days, when you said, do you do open source or closed systems, right? And in a way, it has some analogy there, right? And so if you do need to enhance and deepen and personalize now with quick learning, compute, actually the models are converging. And so in that sense, if you can, then obviously open weights makes more sense. But frankly, I think for a lot of companies that's only trying to, and large and small companies, not the hyperscalers, it's just trying to leverage AI tools for efficiency checks. I would say, you know, the existing models are extremely productive and very useful. And frankly, actually, I think the new ones is in prompt development, right? It's really how to use it. So, you know, what goes for us is the bottom line that matters. If compute comes down, if the models are being trained faster, more efficient, actually, I do think that the infrastructure, so to speak, barriers to entry is gone down. And therefore, we do, as an investor lens, we're trying to look for companies that can make money, you know, drive real solutions. And in that sense, I think that the key advantage is going to shift back into the application layer.
Can I add one thing here? So I think this is a super interesting topic because, in a sense, LLM tokens are sort of the oil that fuels the industry right now. Right? This is sort of, you know, the typically the biggest you know, cost that most of these companies have. So I completely agree with you that as a company, you can just build on top of models, you can train a model, both is totally valid, just know what you're doing, right, and have the right team in place. For the cost argument, it's actually super interesting. We're seeing different trends. We're seeing trends in two directions, right? So on one side, if you plot a model of same quality, so roughly same intelligence, and the cost of that model currently decreases by about 10x year over year. As a startup, that's awesome. If I have a business model today that's massively gross margin negative, that's okay. Just wait a year and you'll be fine. Right? It's a very unique moment in time where that works. On the flip side, if you look at, you know, what does it cost to run the best coding analysis with the maximum available context window with the best reasoning model I can find, that's getting ridiculously expensive. It's easy to, you know, for a developer to burn through thousands of dollars of LLM costs in a month, right? So if you go to like the Reddit forums on Cursor or something like that, 100% of the discussion is like, oh my God, this is getting too expensive. So basically we have this bifurcation now, where with the reasoning models, we're getting these super expensive ones, and at the same time, so, you know, the models of constant quality going down. So it's just a bigger gap. How expensive your tokens are matters more and more.
So we've landed on a mental model to approach this, which is somewhat contrarian to a lot of the popular narrative. Which is, when we first got into this was when fine-tuning was hot in the LLM, the whole wave had just started, right? And we had a lot of FOMO about fine-tuning, but we didn't have the budgets to make a serious plan for that. That turned out to be serendipitous. Because to your point, Jenny, it's turning out to be, you know, while it feels like we should invest a lot more into tuning the LLM, what we're discovering is there's a huge amount of effort in the applied layer, which is just backbreaking. Right? And it doesn't matter how much, even if you throw Opus at it and burn a whole bunch of dollars. It is very task specific, it's very narrow, it's very process oriented, and you've got to crack it task by task, workflow by workflow. So we've kind of landed on this model where we approach the applied part of it completely differently. It's all about process mapping. We've embraced the fact that we are going to have humans in the loop. We're not fighting that. We will have humans in the loop to steer and navigate. The focus for us now becomes saying, is there a business metric we can move now? And it turns out that for a lot of our customers, all of this stuff is great on Twitter. The reality is most of our customers are struggling to run a single prompt to summarize something successfully and stably in their enterprise environments. The problems of the now, right? We are very, at least from what we're seeing, we're still very far from the cutting edge. A lot of it is just going in there and helping customers figure out what they want to do, because what they have is an AI mandate, but no roadmap, and no access to expertise to map the roadmap out. And if we look at folks in the services side of it, that are obviously Palantir, everyone quotes, but Distill is another example. It looks like a huge amount of the problem space today is in helping enterprise customers figure out their roadmaps first. And the implementation is actually the easy part, because it turns out that the first set of things they need to build are not that technically challenging. They're business challenging.
So, good segue into computing and cost, right? So, now maybe again, right, either to Krishna or to Sidu, how should a young company today, right, plan its compute strategy?
Sure. I think it's difficult to make an open-ended statement because a lot of it depends on the category of task. For the kind of work we're doing, which is heavily oriented towards all parts of a software project lifecycle from contract to QA, we've got a rough benchmark right now, very rough benchmark, that we need to be spending about 100 tokens in review and QA for every token of creation. So now you need to start picking the task that you want to attack and then running estimates of what is the token cost to complete the task, and then do 100x on that for quality control of the output.
So the question of cost, and this was also discussed by my colleagues here, varies, as he said, based on the context where you're going to use these models. But in general, the more widely spoken about models tend to be expensive to train. And I've chosen my words carefully, widely spoken about. And so whether they are the best models that will ultimately penetrate is going to very much depend on business strategy, as was discussed. So we agonize about this every day on how to position ourselves, being a small company, to fit your definitions, on what part of this problem is technological, which I think we're close to finishing and declaring success, but what part of it is business process and acceptance. And we're looking at two verticals closely. One is optimization, which is everybody talks about, supply chain management and logistics type problems, and the other is training in AI/ML. But at the bottom of it is a big infrastructure play, and that is this whole data center, NVIDIA-centric structure, which can cost an arm and a leg. And there is momentum now picking up. Just in the last 2 days, there have been 2 announcements about hybrid data centers. So the idea is that the scaling laws can be much, much better if you couple a quantum computer into a traditional data center. So ultimately, if we are going to plan for a 3, 5, 8 year win, that's what a small company, at least for us, would be looking at.
Thanks, Krishna. So for Guido and Jenny, right, it must be really tough though, right? Because you're probably getting deluged by a whole wave, right, of startups coming out here. And how do you think they can convince you that they have an edge on cost and performance, right, when you look at the deal, right? How would you position that for the audience, right, on what it is that you look into, especially on the cost and performance side?
All right, I'll try first here. So usually, I'm not sure this is the right question. Usually when we talk to a startup, there's of different phases, right? You may talk to a pure research team who are saying, look, we're the first one to do something new that previously wasn't possible. And we find that super exciting. We love investing in pure research teams that have, zero go-to-market expertise is better than having a bad go-to-market person on the team, right? So if you're pure research, that's great. What we do care about is this roughly the best in the world, right? Because one thing about software companies is that the number 1 versus number 2 versus number 3 usually has very steep drop-offs, right? So you want to have a team where you think these guys can probably build the best company in the world in the space. So have a team that's very, very deep, has deep spikes, really understands the space. Cost, pricing, that comes later, right? That really doesn't matter at that point.
Yeah, I have to agree. So I think on the early stage side, obviously our question is always why you, why now, and like what's the solution? And so in the 0 to 1 phase seed to Series A, it's really, we don't go down to like cost efficiency because we are capitalists, we have money, right? So the bottom line is that if it's not just money, beyond money, why are you unique? And maybe there's a little difference. The companies that we see in the US and the companies we see in Asia, Asia companies generally are looking at applications, right? It may not be, they're not using 10 to the power of 23 compute for many of their development or solutions. They are trying to say, okay, is there a gap in the, whether it's a vertical process or whether it's a horizontal AI process. And therefore, naturally, the cost to serve is a lot lower compared to, say, in the US. I think generally, US startups that we've seen, it's true, right, with the collaboration within universities, algorithms, core research, like that's, you know, how do you compute on small language models? Like those are where the types of companies are a little different. So from a capital efficiency, naturally, I think Asia companies are probably from 0 to 1 a little bit more efficient. So then our question is, are you just a wrapper, right? Why are you unique? If you can do it, what else? You know, how come others cannot? So the type of questions that we ask is a little different. Maybe oversimplifying it, the product market fit for each of the market, each of the solution will be different. And then obviously, if the Series A company and they said, I need to raise 100 million, okay, that's gonna then get into the capital question where we're like, what do you need the 100 million for, right? Can you use hybrid data centers and all that? So I would say that's second order questions. Typically in Asia, you don't get 100 million raised on Series A. In the US, it's almost common as well. So that's why it's not the right question.
Yeah, I mean, we've had $1 billion seed round, so you know what these terms mean. I'm not quite sure anymore these days.
There was a saying a few years back when I was in Bay Area 2-3 years ago. I said, "How do you price AI startup?" And this was before DeepSeek, before open models and all that stuff. And they said, if you have 10 PhDs, it's going to be 50 million because each PhD is worth 5 million. That number has gone up in the US. I think in Asia we don't have that many.
Because Meta now pays them more per year than 5 million, so the cost is obviously higher.
So the valuation matrix has gone off the door.
Okay, so now, right, for the next step, seeing that, you know, we have a lot of scientists here and some roboticists also, and for all of us, right, AI is accelerating discovery and also applied robotics, right? And seeing Thuc, you know, you came from exactly that segment right now. And what partnerships, right, do you see today, given AI and robotics, right, whether it's corporate labs, pilots, licensing, how do you think we should spin out, right, given that, you know, we're in the field of robotics and scale internationally? What's your opinion right now?
Yeah, so I think if I had to choose, I'd say all of the above, right? Because you know, I think they all have full. But from my experience, you know, as can speak for the healthcare industry in the US, typically, you know, you need some sort of like a pilot with, you know, some really strong hospital, you know, to give you the credibility, right? And so that's that kind of a cornerstone. And then, you know, whether it's like a partnership with a multinational corporation, then will help you scale, you know, to different markets. But having nailed that first pilot is always very important. And one of the almost painful lessons we learned along the way is that never go for free pilot. You always make, you know, that first paid pilot because the customer will be a lot more committed to make sure that it becomes successful. And then you also get, you know, some measurement on like the willingness to pay, you know, to scale that out to other customers. And so that's my take.
Thanks, Thuc. So this is a question for Sidu, right? Because by the time when I got to know Sidu and we worked together, I was just amazed at Gojek's documentation of all the code that was out there. And seeing nowadays, you can produce quite a lot of documentation relatively easily, though, in this age of AI where trust, safety, and regulation, right, are going to become more and more important. what's the minimum level of documentation and transparency that you as an AI startup right now convinces a buyer?
So it's actually an interesting dynamic because, I mean, we're squarely in the enterprise segment. And internally, we're already at a place now where everyone has an agent that's connected to both their project management board as well as to chat, in our case Slack. So now, no human being posts updates. They're working and the agent is posting updates on the side, right? Same thing for tickets. Now, again, we're a services business. This is extremely relevant to the services business because your customer wants to know what's happening, right? So we do promise that transparency and that accountability, and it's now trivial. Like, this is one of the core value props we find of LLMs and AI, which is the ability to allow you to increase the quality and level of output without having to upskill your team, which is a big deal when you're dealing with a heavy manpower business. That said, that transparency is not necessarily something customers always want, right? It's not the same. We've noticed there's cultural differences. The India market, for example, is probably not a great one for a lot of transparency because nobody wants their name against the requirement. Right? No, everyone wants to just bump it up to their boss so that finally the boss approves the scope. They don't want their name against that particular line item. And then if you're hyper-transparent in that kind of environment, it can blow back. By and large, what we found is in developed markets, the extreme transparency, everything's documented in real time, live. There's comments, there's updates, there's wiki updates, all that stuff getting done, all the good stuff that you want, without loading up the developers, the BAs, the PMs, with this work. It's a big deal, it really matters. I do want to flag that nuances, specific customers that can actually go back.
Thank you, Sidu.
Can I make a quick comment on sort of regulation and safety? So I personally think this is one of the most overrated things in AI at the moment. So let me take a strong argument here, just get a little bit of controversy going in here. If you look back to the last big tech cycle, which was the .com boom, right, the network revolution, when we invented network and connected the world, there was a lot of debate around how safe is the internet, how safe should it be, right? And various proposals. One of the funny stories from Silicon Valley was that Eric Schmidt, who was CEO at Sun at that time, banned the web browser at Sun Microsystems because it was insecure. Which is absolutely correct, right? A web browser can bring all kinds of bad things in. But he missed the more important point that this was sort of the future of the company, and you know, and at the end of the day, that in part, sort of this thinking caused Sun to lose out on the network revolution, right? In the early stages of a new technology, I think it's far more important to figure out how to make something useful, right? How to regulate it, how to cope with bad effects, comes usually much later in the cycle. And trying to do that early is actually super harmful because you end up regulating something which you have absolutely no idea about and how it's going to get used, right? If you would have tried to write internet regulation when the first package was transmitted via the ARPANET, I mean, you would have gotten everything wrong that you could have possibly gotten wrong with it.
Yeah, I actually like to double click on that, Guido. So I'll use an example on China. So definitely when new technology comes about, and new business models comes about, it's also, right, number one, it's very hard for regulators who are not users, who are not, technologists, to really be able to regulate. Typically, regulators are the last of the adoption curve, right? They are definitely not the early adopters. And so if you look at the history of the last 20 years in terms of internet, actually China is very interesting, right? We may all say, oh yeah, is this democracy or not? But the government, over the last 20 years of tech adoption, has been, particularly first 15 years, has been extremely open to allow private enterprise to experiment, to try. And then, of course, once they gather enough information, they start to then put guardrails, start to have licenses, and then license the right player. And if we recall, in the early days of internet online content sharing, right? We had a lot of proliferation of online video players, right? So you could have a Tudo, then you have a Qi, and then Qku, and all of a sudden you have like 1,000 players. Similarly, when ride sharing was up and coming, yes, you have Uber in the US, and then you have 1,000 ride sharing guys in China. Every single city and every province, the government did not regulate. The government said, okay, we don't know what this is about. Is it going to take away business from my taxi drivers? Is it going to take away my state-owned capability to broadcast propaganda, right? But they did not step in and start to curtail the market. They basically said, okay, let's watch it. And it was very interesting. Of course, this was early days in the growth of internet and technology in China. There were conversations. So the government would call on entrepreneurs in certain sectors to come in, close door, and hear and listen and understand what's happening. Obviously, when you have 1,000 guys providing online video content, the content starts to go into all different verticals, right? Sensitive content and all that. And so once the government had enough data, had enough understanding of which are the leading companies, which are the right type of content or the non-censored or allowed type of content, they step in and they say, okay, in 6 months we're going to regulate. If you don't have a license, you're out. And so then all the guys, submit applications for the licenses. And in 6 months, 1,000 went to 100. If you're not the top 100, the rest all died. Obviously, some are ventured back, right? And so then the first 100, they look at the top 3 lists, the top 6 lists, and then they start to draw guardrails. So I'm using it, and there are many examples like that. And I think in the areas of AI, are regulators the first to adopt? For sure not. And so I do think that it's good to hear that it's not just EU has a EU AI Act, but many of the countries are still in that. Let's watch and see, let's learn. And I think that it is the right approach. For innovation to really have a way to grow first before it gets stampled down, it is the right approach.
I mean, for us as a USVC, the EU AI Act actually helps us with funding a lot of European entrepreneurs at the moment that are coming over because they feel they can't build the companies there, right? But I'm German originally, so it's kind of sad. I think another positive example, I really like your example, another positive example is what the United States did with commercial space launches. They basically initially passed the law to say for a certain time period, we define, I think it was 10 years, we define observation window. During that time, a fair amount of freedom to the Federal Aviation Authority to step in if there's a problem, but other than that, leave it unregulated. And at the end of the observation period, you have enough data, and then you start regulating. I think this is the kind of mindset we need.
I knew I could always rely on Guido because since the late 90s, when we got to know each other, we would have fantastic discussions, right? Just straight to the point. Moving on to more a university setting right now, and this question is directed to Krishna, right? How should universities support professors like yourselves, right? Who want to be involved without overstretching their academic duties?
Well, I have a broader response to that. So with your permission, I prepared these famous slides that I've created. If you could pull them up. I want to look at this 4-phased approach to taking what a professor does, which when I started this journey, I was a professor, and going all the way to monetizing at the end, which what you folks do very well. So not that you don't do the rest well, but at least that was what I did. So if you look at the sequence that universities typically pursue, you think of some sort of deep research idea. Everybody would know this, I suppose, PageRank. And then you go off and start something around PageRank. And so that would be phase 2, and say Sergey and Larry were sitting down University Avenue, which we all know well, in the bike shop and doing whatever they're doing. So that would be stage 2 in this, right? And then comes the interesting part, which is where the rubber, meets the road, and that would be stage 3 and stage 4. And going from stage 2 to stage 3, I would say, is where the biggest hazard is usually for startups and other companies. The reason being that the first 2 blocks, the people involved with them, have a very, very exciting view of what they're doing. But the fact that it translates into something, especially leading to stage 4, is not something to think about. Simon, to be fair, you can't think about all of it because you monetize and pivot as you move forward. You mentioned Eric, so if he hadn't come to Google at the time he did, might not have actually pivoted and generated the kind of growth that happened. We don't know. But certainly he played a big role. So the stage 3 and 4 is what I think universities should really look at in trying to help at least get to stage 3. After that, it kind of can grow on its own. So if you look at this particular piece here, the big thing, I think morning, Alberto mentioned this as well, you need to be aware as you develop your technology where the pull is, not your push. Push is great, but you really need to look at pull. So speaking, putting my money where my mouth is, speaking for our own company, we saw a lot of pull. I'll give you just, if you'll bear with me for 30 seconds, an example. Everybody brags about quantum computing, and sometimes even does a disservice by saying, I'll solve something which took centuries in milliseconds or seconds. The question that nobody asks is, so who cares if you solve this problem? So the who cares question is very, very important. And we ourselves were victim of it in the first 6 months, where we solved an optimization problem which we showed could not be solved possibly. And this was a benchmark provided by Airbus and BMW. They have a quantum challenge consortium. So we showed that to our first round of customer interactions, and we found that one of the VPs, I still remember, he said, I don't care if you can solve something I can't. Tell me if you can do better what I can. So loosely, this is an optimization problem which is quantified as the size of a matrix. And the matrix size was 1 million variables on which you're optimizing. He said, I don't solve more than 50,000 variables on a given day. Can you actually take this and make it work better? So that's one type of pull you could say. The other extreme is the absolute, even on the business side, the blue sky pull. And that is the AI claim. So if you take the very expensive long train cycles and actually cut them down, the opportunity is huge. So if the technology can pivot, and that's what we're doing, we're not abandoning the more traditional bread and butter, but we see this sort of new pivot as something we need to do as a business. So the key things you mentioned in our own journey, the first part is who's doing this, and the second part, and I give Accelequant a lot of credit here, is the money you spend to get there. And the money you spend to get there, we are past the second phase now, but they're very happy to stay with us through 3 and 4, and it's going to cost. And that's really all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, so for the professors, right, that are in the audience that are thinking, or the researchers in the audience, right, how can we have a happy medium, especially in NUS, seeing that you also have experience at NUS? How can we build a happy medium to make this kind of exploratory thinking grow?
I think to some extent what I heard in the morning was this venture fund you have created, which is also very well connected. When you have top-notch VCs at the, well, not at the table, but at the table here. So that connectivity, along with your ability to see, and also you mentioned the differences between Asia and the US. Some of these things are to be funded at US scale, even if they're operating out of Asia. So we have offices in Bangalore and Singapore soon, hopefully, but our funding is US scale. So you need to think at a scale where what it costs to get there, not so much be all about cost arbitrage. That doesn't pay off. So you have actually received this 150 million was mentioned as an entity. It's a great start. You yourself being in VC, yet another great start. And the fact that the ecosystem here is building, you accused me of being a mathematician, but the initial conditions are right.
If I may jump in as well. So I've been thinking a lot about, with what we talked about, right? Availability of compute tools, open source or closed. What can a school do, right? And how do you, so you have all your professors out there, you have your PIs out there. They are all doing their own research, collecting their own data. Now, obviously, if they want to leverage AI, they could use any of the model out there. And there you go. The information, the research gets onto the open web, and then it's logged internationally. So the question there is there a way for an NUS to create an environment within the school where this, you have the bargaining power, obviously, to get the best resources, whether it's from the compute perspective, from a data warehousing, pooling perspective, so that the professors and PI can do their research knowing that the data is still kept proprietary and safe within the school environment. So I think that's one question, right? Like, do you play the infra layer where you do help the PIs to, allow this technology to stay safe for now? And I think that's a question. The second observation I've seen is that sitting in Asia, 3 years ago you said, who can we use? Is NVIDIA here? Not really. Can we buy the chip? Not really. And then we started, but to be fair, I think this is changing. The Gemini guys are here. Google has their AI accelerator program. Amazon kind of behind the curve, but they have their similar program here in Asia. OpenAI, in fact, today is doing a Founders Day. So actually, and all the resources I asked them, I said, what can we get for a startup? And they said, well, it's a great startup, we'll give free compute. Oh, compute is even cheaper. Right now, I think that at the university level, is there a way to create that environment? It's not a single model, it's multi-model, it's anchored here with different types of tools that is then made available to the broader community within NUS versus each of these entrepreneurs or each of these researchers or professors having to go seek it out themselves, because this gap is not there. So that's the first two considerations. And then I always had this question. I said, from all the schools' perspective, do you know when your professors are writing papers and they are being cited, how many is out there? Do you know? Of all the NUS alums, professors, students, and they have papers that's been cited, is there a database that's tracking all this? Because the citation can also lead to, maybe IP that can be patented. So again, I think it's as a school, perhaps it's how do you now create this middleware is not the right word, but an area where we can help to uplift, track data, and then ultimately help create, because sometimes the professors have no idea that the paper is cited 1,000 times, and that another company is using that IP to create a brand new company. And so what does it mean? When I like to see charts that says research, development, scaling, and monetization, as VCs, I like to see monetization on day one. I'm very practical. I'm not the kind of investors that says, build it and money will come. I'm actually saying, entrepreneurs, when you're on your journey, think about how you're going to make money. Because days are gone when the money will come. The money will only come if it's a viable product and there's product market fit and people will pay. Exactly to your point.
So for checking citations, Google Scholar, we actually check it regularly if we get a business plan.
Not international.
It's pretty good international, actually. In my experience, so we use it a lot, right? It's just like to understand, checking archive. What's the name of the discussion version of it? It's really important to understand how the research background looks like. Look, here's my take. What my 2 cents for what's important from the university. The first thing is you need amazing students. I think NUS checkbox that qualifies one of the best universities in the world. The second thing is make sure they work on relevant topics. So just to give an idea, so at Stanford today, about 25% of all students, not computer science students, but of all students, take the natural language processing with deep neural networks class, which is the class how to build basically ChatGPT, right? You need to understand software development therefore, you need to understand the neural networks for that, you need to understand NLP for that, and then you can take that class, right? It's super specialized, but 1/4 of all students across all disciplines take that class, right? If there is a major macro trend, right, basically making sure you have people who understand that trend and really have a little bit of expertise in that. And the other thing, I think I like the suggestion of compute farms, GPU power, right? If you're an AI, for example, right, you need GPUs, you need a lot of them. Can startups easily buy them? Can every lab buy their own GPU farm? Completely impossible, right? So they're having clusters that you can use across the university or across the country even. I think it's very valuable.
I will put on my university hat for a second and let you know that we are building compute, as Inchai will attest to, and it is a significant compute. And the other thing is that, yes, we are putting bits and pieces in the middleware also. In fact, there's a gentleman up here in the audience, and we're binding a lot of things citation-based and IP-based using tools like NAM. to connect everything in natural language. And we also have AI tools that were developed here that will be able to do invention disclosures, not patents yet, but invention disclosures by chucking a paper inside. So we are on that right now. Sidu, you want to say something?
It's probably more like a comment on the culture side of this, right? Because I know the US has a very different culture. If I told my parents when I was studying that I want to drop out and start up, they would have killed me, right? So I think it's a bit of a left field comment, but I think parents are important, right? In India, we had this 10 years ago, even a hiring problem as a startup. Because your parents are like, what, you didn't get a job at Infosys, you didn't get a job at Microsoft, why are you joining a startup? So I think there's like this subtle cultural aspect where people have to buy into that sense of adventure and the risk-taking appetite. I mean, I'm an adrenaline junkie, I started up right out of college. But could I have dropped out? No chance.
Which is probably why he races around his motorcycle nowadays. But that's a separate topic. I think, right, on that right now, what would you, right, as investors, and please chime in also, right, anybody that feels in, you know, you see a lot of different licensing models and equity terms offered by universities, you know, to their startups and all that. What would you like to see happen in this context of NUS in order to make these inventions flow?
I would say make it simple. Don't be fixated. The key is funnel. As if the funnel is extremely big, then you're going to encourage innovation. And so if you ask me about percentage, I would say less than 10, 5 is pretty ideal. And I'm speaking for an investor who comes in on day one, looks at the cap table and said, is the team incentivized to continue to grow? To be able to build a team, to be able to build, you know, more international management team to come along with it. So I would say solve for the quantity first, and then the quality will come.
Yeah, I think it's exactly right. I mean, the Stanford has an Office of Technology Licensing. They're basically like, look, our goal is to find a good home for the technology and to make Stanford great as a research and teaching organization. We're not here to make a monetary return. End of story, right? I think when we did a deal with them for my startup, we ended up at 2%, so I think 5 is a little high. This is software. But it also depends. I mean, this is software. Like in software, patents and IP tend to be worth a lot less, right? If this was drug discovery, it would be a different discussion, right? And I have no idea about drug discovery, so I don't know what this would be.
Thanks, Guido. Okay, moving along. I'd also like to keep maybe, you know, the last 10 to 15 minutes, right, for questions from the audience for everybody also. So I'll just move quickly along. So, education for future founders, right? What would you say, what makes the skills, right? Technical, product, sales, maybe even zero regulatory or some regulatory. How would you best prepare students, right, to lead global AI companies in your perspective? Knowing what you know today.
I would say none of the above, all and none of the above. I think that today the world is extremely complex. The best entrepreneurs do not just stay in one place, one country, one university. So I do encourage schools to have your students and entrepreneurs, not just AI, actually broadly, to go out there, interact and make friends and connections. And so if you can send your students, professors to markets like in the US, in Europe, China, even India, that is the best education you can give them. If I can even plug, forget PhDs, get out there, because the world is your best PhDs. Well, AI, well, ChatGPT 5 is supposed to take away, it's going to compete with you. It will be better than any PhDs you can find.
Yeah, I think I roughly agree. I mean, look, at the end of the day, taking business class is super interesting, or, you know, something with marketing and things. We took a class in marketing together at Stanford. Why not, right? You learn something, you pick something up. It's, you know, nice to have as a well-rounded education. But at the end of the day, you learn more from other students than you learn from your teachers, right? So, you know, just immerse yourself with really smart people. You know, now I make one small caveat, which is sometimes you get these extremely large waves, like, you know, the dot-com revolution in the late 90s or the internet boom now. You probably want to understand what's happening, because 90% of the startups are the big startups, going to come out of that wave, right? So today I would take classes on AI to understand how this thing works. You always want to understand one layer below of what you're working at, right? So you probably just want to do prompting, but you should still understand how the layer beneath works. But other than that, just, you know, in your particular area where you want to start up, you can't go deep enough. You know, you want to know everybody who's relevant in the field. You want to have worked with the best labs in the world, right? And really sort of want to be in the network of the people that drive this field forward. That's more important than everything else.
I actually violently agree with what both of you said, so I'm not going to repeat that. I'll talk about the other perspective, which is how do you look inward and look at your own psyche and decide what you should do. In my perspective of this is the singularities now, right? Like change is just going to accelerate. We can already see it's going to get worse. It's already at a place where as a student, you're going to see one or two of your major beliefs invalidated in any given year. Honestly, if you ask me, it's now down to quarters. Equally, there are professional areas which you may have had your eye on, which will be obsolete by the time you graduate, right? In just the last 2 quarters, software development has started to become obsolete. A large chunk of video editing is gone. If you go back to the previous year, there were other professions that were impacted. I think that a medium and long-term strategy is pointless. You have no choice but to operate on the short term. And this can be extremely destabilizing, which I said looking inwards is crucial, right? Everything that we as human beings depend on to generate self-confidence and drive is getting pulled out. Because you just don't have the time to build up. So now you're in the situation where you have to reflect and change direction quarter to quarter. And you can't hang on to anything that was given to you as advice that, you know, maybe you figured something out, you know, a trusted teacher taught you, your parents taught you. You can't depend on any of that being true 2 quarters from now. And this demands an enormous amount of inner calm, if I can put it that way, where you're just like, okay, whatever's happening, that's fine, I'm going to adapt, change, and move on. And I think that is going to be a defining characteristic for the next foreseeable future.
Can I make one quick comment on this? I completely disagree that software engineering is dead. I think it has completely changed, right? Any software development class you can take in pretty much any university in the world today is best be seen as a relic from an ancient past with no practical application today. It should be called the history department, right? It has changed so drastically, it's not even funny anymore. But I think as a discipline, it will exist.
Guido has a very interesting past and had a front row seat when 2 guys were writing a new telephone book called google.stanford.edu. You know, you might want to ask him about that later. Moving along.
Sian, if I may, can I add one note here?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so one of the very common mistakes I've seen with research group within UC is they fell in love with the technology, right? And they so value the technology, and they use the technology looking for the problems, you know, to provide that. But I think that's a very common mistake because, you know, you don't sell technology. You don't even sell a product. You sell a solution. Right, and so you really need to understand your customer, their pain points, their workflow, all that, right? How you fit your technology into what they need to bring the ROI. And so I think that's one area that, you know, the founders really need to get sharpened on, right? How to really understand the customer, become an expert in the problem space that you're trying to solve. So,
based on that comment, how do you explain OpenAI? I mean, they were a research lab that created a solution, which is LLMs. They had no idea what it would be useful for.
Well, I think, you know, some is probably, you know, out there and then the different beasts, right? But I think, you know, for most of the technology, you know, if it depends on the scope, right? LLM is just like so big, you know, and I think people start to understand, like, okay, what can you do with it? But I think if you know, the founders are trying to look for the problem, I think it still applies.
Well, Sam is a businessman. Sam is not a professor. I've known him for many years behind. So his mind is constantly thinking the business case, the solution. But obviously the progress of the product, R&D, and you know best, probably lacks his aspiration. If you ask him what he wants to do.
I think it's absolutely true. I just reflecting on us.
Why should we out 2 years ago?
We're investing into a lot of companies that are solutions looking for a problem. There's a new technology sort of in a vague way clear that this will disrupt something and have a major new impact. Not quite sure how yet. And for a seed round, that's totally fine, right? For your $200 billion Series B, that's probably not fine, right? But it depends a little bit which stage you're in.
Absolutely, I think that's a very important point. There is a stage, if you look at this picture I had about 1, 2, 3, 4, where the predictability on the business side is less. You want more predictability on the technology. And as you move into 3 and 4, hopefully the founder would be able to, ideally for these type of technologies, which are very deep tech, the same founder or founders should be able to also navigate stages 3 and 4. It can't hire a professional CEO and hand it off. The ability to pivot, understand pull, be able to even think about revenue and ROI or recurring revenue, all these things the person has to want. Big demand, but has to be.
Okay, so at this juncture, I'd like to ask the audience, for questions to the group. We have about 10 or so minutes left, I believe, of free time.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for this lovely panel. It's really been illuminating. My name is Dharma. I'm from a company called Stability. We built the world's first known cryptoless public blockchain. So I have, I guess, 2 comments. So the first is, I think I very much agree that there are certain instances where an advancement in technology, especially infrastructure, may not have an apparent use case at the outset. Nevertheless, it changes the world. Electricity in a world of candlelight, cars in a world of horses, the internet in a world of mail. In fact, if you look at some of the early videos on how people were describing the internet, they describe it as post, but instant. I mean, they were essentially describing the internet as email. We all know it's so much more than that now. So anyway, the second point, which is really a question for our panel, is by some estimates, next year more than 50% and maybe up to 80% of all data that's generated will be synthetically generated data. And so I think this raises some questions about how do we make decisions about whether or not we can rely on that data. And by this, I don't mean the truth of the content, but rather the contextual information accompanying it to allow us to make decisions about whether or not we can take actions on it. So I'd like to open this to the panel for any of your thoughts on it. Thank you.
I'm sorry, if you could clarify why you would do anything different than with non-synthetic data for this specific problem?
Okay. So I guess maybe let me share some of the context around it. Right. So currently, when we rely on data, we generally have maybe 3 approaches to determining whether we can act on it. Either we verify it ourselves, or we look to an authority to tell us you can trust it, for example, government, or you look to some kind of trustworthy source, right? So like a FANG company, a bank, some kind of regulated entity. But in a world where there's a huge influx of information, how do we scale this ability to decide whether or not to act on data? So that's kind of the fundamental question that I'm getting at.
So you're anticipating that the volume of data will be that much higher, and therefore there will be a delusion, somehow coping with it is going to be a problem.
Yes, exactly.
Is that what you're trying to say?
Yes, it's a scenario of information superabundance. Right?
I mean, I'm not sure there's a real difference between the future and the present today, right? There is a little bit more data on the internet that I can ever possibly consume, obviously. And if you trust all the data you find on the internet today, you'll have a really bad time, right? Most of it is unreliable or wrong or made up. I'm not sure that this being AI generated changes anything. I also don't think it's going to be an AI versus human so much more as in human using AI creating data, right? So all data will have fingerprints of AI on it, but might still have a human behind it.
Thank you. I think that's a good point. This point about the fingerprints of AI on the data. I can give a specific example. So I come from the legal industry. So, electronic evidence becomes a big one, right? I mean, already we can see that generative AI is pretty capable. It can produce pretty convincing outputs. This is only going to get better. And so at some point, we expect that, there will be an increase in electronic evidence that maybe has been tampered with. And on the face of it, wouldn't, raise any red flags, wouldn't trigger something like a forensics investigation. And so accompanying that, we would also expect to see an increase in the volume of challenges regarding the authenticity or the integrity of electronic evidence. And so I think this is one example where it becomes important to distinguish whether or not data does have the fingerprints of AI on it. And it's not to say that AI-generated data is bad. It's certainly useful, but it becomes the context in which it's being used that determines whether it is appropriate to rely on that data. I hope that helps clarify.
Well, I think maybe I have a different slant to this. I think AI-generated data or synthetic generated data is actually useful for scenarios where you don't really want it to happen. Okay, what do I mean? So in war gaming, you don't want wars to happen, but you have a lot of historical data from past wars. Okay, some may not like this example. Obviously, you're not going to fight a new war, but you have to plan. Right? What does that mean? And so I think AI-generated data probably can outperform human strategies to allow for more corner cases, for more new cases that arise in the new world. Obviously, feed in geopolitics, feed in different inputs, and then voila, right? Like you have an emulator type environment where then you can have predictive scenarios that comes into it. So obviously, I know you have a different type of question, but when you said, is AI-generated data good or bad? I don't think it's good or bad. I think it's really about how you use it and where you can get the data. And to the extent that it is helping to replicate, for example, you want all cars on the road to be autonomous by 2030 in Singapore. How do you do it? You don't have all the cars be autonomous by 2030 and not simulate. A situation where traffic lights needs to be revamped and things like that. So maybe I'll spin it that way, whether it's actual collected data, there's a lot out there, but the past may not replicate the future, and therefore in those specific use case and scenario, we may have to synthetically create that environment and test 1 million corner cases before you actually have a real life example. I used to be defense, so we use a lot of synthetic data.
I'd like to throw it out to another person in the audience, or a few more. Yeah, please.
First of all, thank you for the discussion today. It's wonderful, wonderful. So a bit about myself, I'm Frank. I'm the founder of an AI company where we do due diligence, having investors on their due diligence. I'm a US graduate also. I have a question specifically to Guido and Jenny. When you look for startup in Singapore, specifically very early stage, like seed or pre-seed funding, what are the characteristics that you are looking for in a company, and how can we make more appealing to you?
So it depends a little bit what particularly you're doing. Are you building a product for a local market or are you building a product globally, right? Yeah, if it's for a local market, I'm probably the wrong person to ask. We have an applications team, right? They deal with this a lot more than I do. And if it's a product for a local market, for us, we probably look at that more in a later stage, just because we just don't understand the market well enough to tell these things very, very early on. If you do it for the global market, we care that you're the best in the world, right? Or maybe second best, but usually software, the number 1 is worth a lot, the number 2 is worth less, and the number 3 is worth a lot less. So, do we think this could be the number 1 and number 2 company in this space in the world? And if that's the case, it doesn't matter where you sit. In Silicon Valley or Singapore, we treat you absolutely the same.
Well, if I hear you correctly, you're helping companies like us do due diligence on companies, right? Or startups and all that. Okay. So a few things. I think number one, business due diligence, we typically do it ourselves. We go in deep dive, talk to founders, talk to the business customers, number one. Obviously, we also spend time on the founders. Financial, we would use, whether it's financial, audit firm, accounting firm, forensic. I tell you where there is a blind spot right now, in Asia. In Asia, markets are extremely dispersed. We have countries where GDP per capita is 2,000. And then we have a Singapore that's GDP per capita is 100,000 per year. So what's missing? Where we found, if you can solve this issue, I think you would have our business, which is deep dive analytics on specific founders. I want 3 degrees of relationships. The founder, his friends, his parents, his relatives, and then his wife's friends. So I think that the quality of individual founder due diligence is very hard to do in Asia, in different markets, especially in emerging. And there's no third-party investigation firm. I mean, the only way when we use third-party investigation firm is they actually are ex-CIA kind of, and then they go in and do interviews. If you can leverage data, whatever you can, whether it's online, synthetic, simulator, and then give me a picture, I think it will be extremely insightful, not just to Asia-based investors, but especially to international investors trying to navigate this region. I get a cut of your business.
Awesome. Oh, sorry, this gentleman was first, I think.
Hi, I'm Chris. I'm actually a pre-seed GP based in the Bay Area. And I have a question for you. I also do some mentoring, like lab spin-off schools like MIT and Berkeley. So I have a perspective on both sides. How do you feel like some of those more cutting-edge technologies in the lab, that doesn't quite fit to the 10-year fund model, right? But can really unlock, change the future for, to give you an example, right? In space manufacturing, that can power, faster drug discovery to a chip, on the edge, on device like a humanoid that can unlock, a bunch of different use case, but they might rely on some kind of advanced material or process adoption by TSMC, right? But how do you kind of nurture some of those technologies? And I'm sure there's a bunch of PhDs working on stuff that you want to encourage them to pursue that and not get a job, or do something else.
Okay, I think I got that one for a change. So, which is precisely why, right, for us internally within NUS, right, we structured the direct investment vehicle as an evergreen vehicle, which means, right, I'm sure you know what that means, but for the audience that doesn't, it means that, we are not going to be bound by those 10-year boundaries that are there, which allows us to have a little less pressure in some instances where we really have conviction, right? That even though the path ahead is not clear, it will be something in a certain space. Which I think that's our perspective, but if you ask, Jenny and Guido, for their venture capital perspective, I think it's a bit more constrained, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're purely doing research and it's not clear yet how the product will look like or how you're going to bring something to market or where the value is,
I'll clarify. Let's say it's not in the research phase, it's between phase 2 and phase 3, but it's going to take longer towards monetization, right? Outside a 10-year model. It might depend on other key players in the industry. So using my example, like a Starship, being able to drop that cost, significantly, order magnitude of 10, 100 times, or other key players in the industry like TSMC. So how do you think about that, basically?
I mean, look, it really depends how plannable is it, right? And then if something is too uncertain, has too far of a planning horizon, usually we're like, look, we don't know how to reason about this thing in first principles. It's just like we don't know what to do with it and we wouldn't invest, right? At a very high level, if you look at venture versus industry, I think, venture versus universities, I think the role of university is to basically allow people to try something out where the timelines are unclear, that's off the base camp where you prepare the expedition and train. when you know where the peak is that you want to climb and you want to go out there, right? That's when you go to venture, and that's when you bring the investors.
Yeah, well, I think it's really the match with the right level of capital, right? So different companies obviously have different research gestation time frame, and some companies need 15, 20 years to get there, and they may never get there. So in that sense, obviously there is the corporate venture who may be strategic and willing to take the bet and say we venture create. There's universities that's going from 0 to 0.1, not quite 1, but the 0 to 0.1 may take 10 years for that research to come out. Of course, funds have different strategies. I think funds that are focused on semiconductor obviously have a lot more understanding of how the ecosystem works, is able to help to accelerate by the ecosystem relationship. And rightly, it may not be a 10-year duration fund. It may be 10 plus 1 plus 1 and goes to 15. So I would say that generally when we talk to startup, understanding their life cycle, natural cycle of that technology and that vertical means that when we help companies to find the financing partner, we may have to be a bit more flexible, right? Biotech, for example, perhaps the 0 to 1 in Asia is not funded by the VCs because there's no real VCs here for this space. Maybe it's funded by philanthropic capital, who is there because they want to do good. So there is this understanding the companies and the cycles and what they need, and then of course then the other one is matching the right capital. And then I want to maybe highlight, because you mentioned Starship. Now, it is the case that when I interacted with US companies that's doing hardware, the cost is always an issue, right? Because US, and I'm generalizing here, a lot of US companies have done very well in software. The ecosystem, the talent is extremely deep, right? When you're valuing PhDs at 5 million, 10 million per PhDs, you know the kind of ecosystem power. But when it comes to let's put it in a physical hardware, in a robot, or a car, for example, electric vehicle, very expensive. And that talent, that ecosystem is not in the US. Now, if we persist to do it, then obviously that company must be able to raise billion on Series A. If not, there's no way you can have an EV player in the US. But then think about Asia, right? Asia has huge supply chain, we call it oversupply or dumping, right? Now, what does that mean? Now, if you are a great entrepreneur sitting in the US, you do not just manufacture in the US. I know there's a rhetoric for home buyers, but if you want your company to work, you have to then leverage ecosystem supply chain. If you're making a robot that cleans the floor and the right cost is 3,000, not 30,000, you move yourself to Asia, to China, to get the right supply chain. So has the right investor around the table, you have to be able to tell them, guys, do the right thing, right? So if it's really just a hardware cost and that would then string their 15 years to 5 years, we have to do the right thing. And that's why to come back to why, even as investors, we have to go out there and know more friends.
Yep. We have time for one last question.
My name is Lim Bo Soon. I just wanted to add what Jenny just said on due diligence. There's another dimension that I personally use, that is know the lifestyle and behavior of the person, especially the founders. Who are you? And in my personal experience during a VC days, I actually engaged a third party because I was given the IC gave me the go ahead to put 10 million away. But somehow I got a funny feeling. So I engaged. I spent $10,000, bought a report in 10 days, and that makes the right decision, well spent, because I didn't put away the 10 million. So the behavior is very important, especially in Asia. There's a lot of, people can claim a lot of things, but we just have to be very careful. Because I'm responsible
Just
for
on
my
that,
partners.
I tried ChatGPT and all that, and I said, give me everything you know. But you know what's missing? Language.
Yeah.
Right? Because this could be Indonesian, and there's a lot of local languages, local social media, and when OpenAI pulls the data, it's kind of Western media, and yes, you could kind of translate. So if you could build a prompt or API enhanced to scrape and check all the data, whether it's Malaysian or multiple languages, India, I have to call 60 people for a check of 1%. How do you do it? Solve my issues. Like I said, I think very interesting. You'll be in business.
Well,
Thank
with
you.
that, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for a scintillating discussion, and thank you all for taking the time here and sharing also, and thank you everybody for your questions. I think it's time to wrap this up.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just join me in thanking Dr. Tan with the top job moderating this dynamic panel and all our panelists.